All right, in this video, we're going to program a different instrument into our sampler, in this case, a guitar, and we're going to do it on Windows just so you can see some of the tools that are available there. I'm going to show you the sample editing features in SoundForge and Adobe Audition. There are others options available. Those are the two probably most popular ones. So let's start in SoundForge. So here's SoundForge. What I'm going to do is open up the recording that I did. So this is of a Cromwell archtop guitar. And Cromwell was a Gibson brand in the 1930s. This was a bargain Gibson brand. Gibson made these guitars and then sold them in mail-order catalogs such as the Sears and Roebuck. So I have one of these guitars, and it has a really interesting sound to it, and so this will make a fun sampler patch for us. So I've gone in and recorded myself plucking each of the strings of the guitar, but at 3 different levels. So I have one where I've plucked it really hard, one where I've plucked it sort of medium, and another where I've plucked it really softly. Now, the idea here is that the guitar sounds different depending on how hard you pluck the string, and this is common of a lot of instruments, particularly string instruments. The piano is like this as well. The piano sounds different depending on how hard you press the keys. And it's not just, yes, it's a difference in volume, right? It's louder or quieter depending on how hard you press it, but there's a tonal difference too. You get richer harmonics when you press the key harder or pluck the string harder. And we can program the sampler to respond to the velocity that we press the key on the keyboard and then select the appropriate sample to get us a different kind of sound. So let's take a listen to what we have here. Cromwell archtop guitar, high E string, plucked, hard. Okay, there it is. So the first thing I'm going to do before I start working with this is I'm going to save this as a copy. Remember, this is a very important thing to do when working with a sample editor. That way you can always go back to where you started if you have to. And the process is going to be essentially the same thing. The first thing we'll do is normalize the recording so that we're using up all of that headroom that we had left available from the recording. And then we will isolate each note one at a time and create a single sample from them. So the first thing I'll do here is normalize this. So I'll go to the process menu here and select normalize. And I'll just normalize using the peak level up to 0 dB full scale. There we go. Now we've got a little bit more level out of these. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'll take this this first string the E string that I plucked really hard, and what I'll do is make a copy of this. So I'll say copy, and then there's a paste special menu here, and I want to paste to a new document. And now I have a separate file just of this one note. So just as before, let's go ahead and trim out the leading silence there, because that'll get you in trouble if you leave it. Looks like I could get a little tighter in there if I wanted. How about right there? There we go. So now the note will play really quickly. Now, the other thing we need to do is figure out how long we want this to be. I've got a really long tail here. Let's see if we can figure out when it actually stops. All right, that is about where it ends. And let's go ahead and create a short little fade out here so that we can make sure it goes completely to silence. So we'll go to process, fade out, and we'll just make a little fade out of that. And if we wanted to, we could set up a loop here. I don't know that it's going to be very useful for the guitars, because in order to do a loop, you have to have a period of time where the level is consistent and the guitar is consistently decaying. So there's never a period of time where it's the same level. But I'll show you how to create the loop in case you need to use it for another kind of thing. So the closest opportunity we're going to have to loop is going to be right here at the end. This is where the decay rate is slowing down considerably. So we'll select this part of it. And what I'm going to do is in this, let's see here, in the special menu, I'm going to say Insert Sample Loop. And it brings up this menu here, and this is where I can say what kind of loop I want it to be, and I'm going to have it be a sustaining loop. And I can also put the note here of the actual note on the keyboard that this sample represents. In this case, it's an E. And notice, though, that the range here is C0 to G10. And you remember when we were doing the recorder exercise, the range started from C-2. So this is normally, this would be E4, but because of this offset, we're probably going to end up doing this as E6. And we'll see if that shows up the right way in the sampler. If it doesn't, you can easily change it in the sampler. But this will save us a little bit of time if we get it right. So now we've got this loop defined. We can click OK. And to fine-tune it, we can open up a special window here. And over here in the View menu, there's a window called Loop Tuner. And this is where we were seeing before on the Mac with the Loop Editor program, you can see the overlap. And there's not much to see here because it's obviously very quiet. But we can, there's some buttons down here. We can play the loop and hear what it sounds like. So I don't know if you can hear that, but we're obviously not at a zero cross point because we're getting a little click. So I can jump us to 0 cross points. So the click is gone, but we're getting a little bit of a bump. So at any rate, you could fine-tune that, and when you get the loop right, you'll save it, and those loop points will be there. Okay, let's look at how to do this in Adobe Audition. So here's Audition. I have the same file loaded up in here. Again, I want to make a copy of it, so let's save this as guitar samples working 2, because I don't want to overwrite the one I had in SoundForge. And it will make me a copy, and then I can work with it. Okay, so now here's our working one. Now let's go ahead and normalize this. So we'll go to Effects, Amplitude, and we want to do Normalize. Normalize to 100%. There we go. And now we basically do the same thing. Let's go ahead and play through this and see what we have. We can go find the other note if we want.
High E string plucked medium.
Okay, so there's the next one. It's the same note. I'm just plucking it a little bit differently. So I'll select this. I'll right-click on that selection. It's like Copy to New, and it'll make a new file with just that sample in it. So I'll go ahead and delete the beginning of it. I might be able to get a little closer. I could probably go all the way to there. So you want this to be tight, but you don't want, if you cut it off too tight, you might actually get rid of some of the stuff you want. That sounds fine. And let's see when we want to cut this thing off. All right, right there is, you know, it's decayed enough that we can barely hear it anymore. So we'll delete the rest of that. We'll create a little fade out here in Audition. There we go. And if we want to do a loop, we can. It's a little different in Audition. You'd have to select the range you want to loop, and then you go here to your File menu and select File Info. And this is where there's a tab here for samplers, and you can check this box to save sampler information, and you can put in the note here. In this case, it gives you just a list to choose from. It's going to be E4. And or actually maybe E5. Oh, we'll see. And then to create the loops, you just, with this, now that we have this selection made, if I click new sampler loop, it will create a loop based on that selection. Okay. And then, you know, we can adjust it from there as needed. So we'll click OK. And there we have the loop. And like I say, this is a little clunky, but what we would do then is put this into loop mode. And let's see, loop. Let's see what loop mode we want to do here. Let's see if this will work. Yeah, not exactly what we were looking for. But if I double click on the loop 1, then I can change my loop mode to loop selection, well, loop view or selection. And then I can hear this loop. We could zoom in here. And from here we could fine tune it, so we could adjust these loop points, but there isn't really a view that I've been able to find anyway, where you can actually see the loop overlap, which is a real limitation here. It's going to make it tougher to find a good loop. Again, it's possible, but it'll just take you a little bit more time. So once you have the loop you want, then you just save the file however you want. This will be a WAV file. Put it in your samples folder, and you would repeat this process for every note that you recorded. So we'll get out of here. Let's go over to Reason now, and here is our sampler. And again, we have this default piano patch programmed in. Let's go ahead and just delete that. So we will initialize this patch. Let's load some samples now. So we'll click our Load Sample button, navigate to our folder where we have our sample files. There it is. Guitar. Go to my WAV files. Now here's all the ones I've made. So I have 3 files for each of the 6 strings. So I want to load in all of the hard plucked ones first, and I've labeled those with an F for forte. So I'm just going to control click on these until I get all of them selected. And then I'll click OK. And there they are. Now the first thing we should probably do is get these in the right order. So the high E would be first. The low E would be last. We'd have the A there. And then, let's see here. Yeah, there's the high E. Then the B, then the D. Oh, so the G goes after the B. So E, B, G, D, A, and then the low E. Now, I have these, the root pitches already defined from the sampler, or from the sample editor. So now all I need to do is define the ranges. So my high E, we know the high E string is never going to go any lower than that E, right? So we don't need to be covering any notes lower than that. So we'll say the low end will be the E, but then it could go quite high up above there. So we'll go ahead and give it some good range there. And then the B, of course, is never going to go any lower than that B. So we'll set that range up there and take it up to where the E string takes over. The G, again, never going to go lower than the G. And set that up there. The D string, we'll start at that D and go up to where the G takes over. The A string, we'll start at the A and go up to where the D takes over. Same thing with the E. All right, let's see what this sounds like. go. So we have all of those mapped in now. What I want to do is group these together. So if I select all of them here, I can right-click on them and say Group Selected Zones. And this will allow me to do some processing on them together. So now that I have them in a group, what I want to do is import their other ones and make groups of them. So I'll deselect all of this, and let's bring in the medium plucked ones, which are the mezzo forte ones. Okay, and we'll bring those in. Now we need to set these up in their own group. So with these selected, I'll right click on these and say Group Selected Zones, and it'll make a separate group for those. And we'll go ahead and reorder these as well. And the G, and the D, A, low E. There we go. And we'll go ahead and map these all the same way. So these is the same string, so they'll cover the same notes. Now notice I have the high E string going up pretty high in pitch, and of course on the real guitar it would be able to do that. And you might find that when you get it up to those really high pitches, it's not sounding very natural, in which case you might want to go and record some of the strings using some of the higher frets. And I have that in the recording that I made that you can work with. I have each of the 6 strings recorded with the octave fret as well, if you wanted to bring those in to get you some of those higher notes. Okay. Now, before I did this recording, I made sure the guitar was in tune, but if you were worried about the tune, you could always go in and tune these samples just like we did with the recorder. Okay, so here we have now 2 sets of samples, and right now we'll get, if we just play the keys, we'll get both at the same time, but we would like to be able to have conditions set up here where one would play over the other. And we can do this with velocity maps. So if I select on zone 1, or the first group here, there is this velocity range, low velocity, high velocity. And these are the hard plucked ones, so this would be one for the really high velocities. So, of course, the highest would be 127, and then the low velocity, we could say maybe 90. So if you hit the key anywhere between a velocity of 90 and 127, you'll get the samples for the hard pluck. Now, if I go to the other ones, these would, well, let's see. So the first one ended off at 90, so the high velocity for this zone would be 89. And then we could take it down to maybe 50. And then we'll bring in the other samples here. And we'll group them together. And we'll get them in the right order. The ordering doesn't really matter. It just makes it easier for us to make sense of it. But it doesn't, as far as the sampler is concerned, it doesn't care what order they are on the list. Okay, that should be right. Okay, so we'll line these up with the same key ranges. And this one. And once we get these key ranges set, then we'll be able to set up a velocity map for these as well. Okay, there we go. And if I select that group now, I can say its velocity range will start at high velocity will be 49, because I believe the last one ended off at 50, right? Yes, it did. So this will go from 1 to 49. Now let's see how this sounds. So there's the hard plucked. If I try a different velocity, I get a different sample, and I'll try the really light velocity, and I get the really quiet one. Okay, there you go. So now we can play this thing. Now, one thing that's happening here is the notes are getting cut off when I release the note, and that doesn't sound very natural. So what I'll do is let me go ahead and select all of these zones, and I'm going to turn up the amplitude release time. Could even go longer than that. There we go. Now when we do it, they sustain. That might be a little long. So as we adjust that, then we can get a more natural decay on these, which might be more appropriate. Okay. There's more things you could do. Obviously, you could make an LFO that would adjust pitch based on a modulation input to create a vibrato if you wanted to. You could work some more with the amplitude envelope if you're not happy with that. And there's any number of different things you could do, but this is a good starting point, and I would work with it from here, and then you could make any changes you wanted. For now, we can save the patch. We can click the Save Patch button and save it as an SXT, and then you could pull it up later as needed. So there's an example of how to program a sampler with multiple samples per note using velocity ranges, and also show some of the sample editors available on Windows. So work with this on your own, and hopefully you'll start making some great sounds.